Mildred Harnack today is remembered as an American author, but also as a woman who helped to resist the Nazi regime in Germany. She moved following her marriage and then began a career as an academic, but she saw the beginnings of Nazism, and the couple moved to Berlin, and then she became interested in Soviet communism. But along with her husband, Mildred became committed to the Soviet ideology, and from 1938 she began to resist Hitler and the Third Reich. The couple then came into contact with other members of anti-fascist resistance, and Mildred Harnack became a resistance fighter of the Red Orchestra. However, she was later arrested, and she is remembered today as the only American woman who was sentenced to death specifically by Hitler, as the dictator of Nazi Germany ordered her death. Join us today as we look at the horrific execution of the American woman guillotined by Hitler. And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Mildred Fish was born in 1902 in Wisconsin, and she was a very talented student as a young girl. She learned to speak German, and she studied at different universities and lectured also in others. She was keen on German literature, and then she met Arvid Harnack, and after a brief affair the pair were engaged, and then married in August 1926. She continued to teach literature in different colleges, but then in June 1929 she migrated to Germany and lived with her husband's family. She received a grant to start working on her doctorate in Germany, and she was deemed to have been an excellent lecturer who displayed tact during the Nazi Party's increasing incursions into university life. But the couple then moved to Berlin, and Mildred then immersed herself in life in Berlin and mixed with other Americans who had moved there. But during her time in Berlin, she witnessed the rise of Nazism, and she became interested in communism and the Soviet Union, and she believed that they would help solve the problems with poverty and unemployment which was plaguing Germany following the Great Depression. She and her husband ditched their capitalist ideas, and her husband even created a small group of writers who met to discuss Soviet proposals for the economy. But Mildred then lost her job as a lecturer at Berlin University, but she never hid her communist views during lectures and even called her students to consider Marxism, saying that it was a practical solution to the evils of the present, as in the rise of the Nazis. The couple were forced to move house, but Mildred Fish Harnack was a popular lecturer with her students. By the time the Nazis seized control, they were both committed to the Soviet Union and communism. She met Martha Dodd in June 1933, and Dodd became her closest friend, and she wrote, "The years of our acquaintance were the most significant of my life. Our work, our experiences, in this courageous tragic years of fulfilment and disappointment are closely interwoven. Everything we thought about, what we loved, hated, what we fought for, we shared with each other. We, all of us, my husband, were in the German underground from 1933 to 1943. I'm the only one left." The two had the same outlook on literature, and they began to host a Saturday salon where political ideas were expressed. Many people attended, and it was said of the salon that, "I was expecting a lively exchange of views and engaging conversation that evening. I only saw suffering and need, people whose spirit was broken." The Nazis were throttling free speech and thought at this time, but in the mid-1930s, Mildred became a celebrated writer and her work was noticed. She wrote critical analysis, but this was no longer tolerated by the Nazis in Germany. Mildred's personality changed, and she seemed frightened and cautious, having lived in the Nazi state for years. But leading up to the Second World War, she became involved in resistance. The Red Orchestra was a pro-Soviet, anti-Nazi resistance group that printed many leaflets and posters aimed to bring about disobedience against the Nazis. They wanted people to rise up, and the group began to consider new members. Along with the Heaths, the Harnacks would spend weekends together and would exchange intelligence in the countryside. The Harnacks then were in contact with other resistance groups, and they were involved in many different acts of Nazi resistance. She and her group published an underground newsletter for the resistance, and also fed economic information from the Nazis to the American and Soviet embassies in Berlin. They also, following the German invasion of the Soviet Union, transmitted military intelligence to Moscow via the radio, and the Gestapo found this out and they were hunting for them. Soviet agent Johann Wenzel was found transmitting messages and he was captured, but then he revealed the members of the group, and the Harnacks were arrested on the 7th of September 1942. They were in Lithuania and attempted to flee. Following her arrest, she was transported every morning in a police car to the Gestapo headquarters, where she was interrogated by Walter Habecker, an evil Nazi who had a black moustache like Hitler's. He was fond of using the thumb screws, calf clamps and other brutal torture instruments that led to confessions. But following this, Mildred was brought back to Berlin, where she was placed on trial. Mildred's husband was sentenced to death on the 19th of December 1942 after a 4-day trial. He was quickly executed 3 days after the guilty verdict at Plotzensee Prison in Berlin. He was executed by hanging, and a foot-long rope was used for this, and this was a method the Nazis used to prolong the suffering of the victim. His final words in a letter to his wife were, "You are in my heart. My greatest wish is that you are happy when you think of me. I am when I think of you." He died believing Mildred would be locked up in prison. But briefly, Mildred was made a widow. At her trial, she was initially found guilty and was then sentenced to 6 years in prison, but Hitler himself refused to accept this, and he thought the court was being too lenient. Because of this, he then ordered Mildred to have a brand new trial, and she was then given a death sentence on the 16th of January 1943. Before the trial, the prosecutor stated, "I urgently warn the Harnack family not to undertake anything whatsoever in favour of this woman. She no longer belongs to your family." She was then sent to Plotzensee Prison and was held inside of the condemned cell there. On the 16th of February 1943, she was taken from her cell to the execution chamber in a courtyard at Plotzensee. Here stood a German guillotine known as a Fallbeil and also a hanging beam, where many people could be hanged at the same time. It was here where Mildred's husband was executed, but it was a guillotine that was selected for Mildred Harnack to die on. Her final words were, "I love Germany so much as well," and quickly she was strapped to the wooden board by the executioner's assistant. She was then slid under the blade and secured, and within seconds a lever was pulled and the blade fell, and Mildred Harnack's head was taken clean off. She was the only American woman executed on the orders of Adolf Hitler. Following her execution, her body was given to Humboldt University, where it was dissected for research. After it was used, the remains were then given to a friend of hers, and they were buried inside of Berlin's Zehlendorf Cemetery. After the war, the American government covered from the public the story of Mildred Harnack's execution due to her communist sympathies. They hid this during the Cold War, and counterintelligence at the time of the war believed she actually deserved her fate and punishment, and considered her execution justified. But over time, the sentiment towards Mildred has shifted, and today she's seen as a hero and a woman who stood up for what she believed was right. She could have easily used her American passport to flee Germany and to escape the Nazi persecution, but she decided to stay and fight and resist. But today, Mildred Harnack is remembered for being the only American woman executed on the direct orders of Adolf Hitler. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.